It's Apple time on TechCrunch TV. It's always Apple time, of course, at TechCrunch. But today we have Victor Agreda, who is the editor-in-chief of the unofficial Apple weblog, otherwise known as tuaw.com, one of our AOL sister publications. Victor, welcome to TechCrunch TV.
Thank you, Andrew.
Well, I guarantee in this segment we're not going to talk about Steve Jobs or Tim Cook. I want to talk about products, Victor. I'm a typical Apple user, although I'm not really obsessed, but I'd like to get a sense from you of what the next year promises from an Apple product point of view. From the iPod, the iPhone, the iPad, and of course the Mac computer perspective. So perhaps you might lay out for our TechCrunch audience where you expect the next year. And of course, let's begin with this much anticipated launch of the next generation iPhone, which is supposed to take place either later in September or early October.
Well, the new iPhone is, as far as we can tell, probably going to be an iterative device rather than introduce a whole bunch of new technologies. Each iPhone, with the exception of the 3G to the first iPhone to the 3G, has introduced a lot of new features, but we don't really think that there are going to be a lot of new features, the same technological features, the same hardware features that you saw introduced in the iteration so far. A lot of what's going to be seen, it will be increases in speed, increases perhaps on the sort of the developer side of things for RAM, and a mild spec bump, a possible form factor change, but not a significant one. And more importantly, iOS 5, because keeping in mind that Apple's sort of secret sauce is this marriage of hardware and software, iOS 5 is going to play a much bigger part, really, than the new hardware in some ways.
And what happens to the iPhone 4? There's been a lot of rumors that the iPhone 4 will maintain its position in the lineup as an affordable entry-level product.
Yeah, well, the iPhone, the 3GS right now has been offered free at Best Buy last week. It's routinely sold for $50 with AT&T right now. So I think what you are going to see is the iPhone 4 become an even more entry-level device. And that's pretty standard practice, really. And it's something that you see a lot in Apple product lineups, where top-end machines will get the latest and greatest chips, and then over the next year or two, you'll see those migrate down through the product line.
Does the iPod have a future, Victor?
You know, that's a tough question. We've actually heard that the iPod Shuffle and the iPod Classic could be removed from the product lineup. We don't have any confirmation of this, but things are starting to align somewhat.
When you say you've heard, does this mean you have moles at Apple, or you have midnight conversations with Tim Cook?
Yeah, no, it's not. We don't talk to Tim Cook that much, or not at all. But yeah, this is coming from our sources who would be familiar with this, who are saying that they have heard within Apple that the iPod Shuffle and the iPod Classic may be going the way of the Dodo. And it's an interesting thing because also Apple has already announced that they will have a product transition that will affect the bottom line. And one of the only things that we can really see happening would be a removal of iPods, and particularly two product lines which are somewhat odd, because the iPod Shuffle addresses the very low end of the market and the iPod Classic is hard drive based. And so both of those sort of stick out in Apple's total product lineup.
September 2012, Victor. We'll certainly have an iPad 3. Might we have an iPad 4 as well? And what will they look like?
The iPad 3 will likely have a high-resolution screen. We're still debating as to exactly what that will mean, since Retina display doesn't actually mean a specific pixel density. It simply means the pixels are virtually indistinguishable at a certain distance. So it's really more of a trick of the eye. The iPad 4, I don't think so. I don't think that Apple's going to, or even needs to, release products in such succession to keep momentum. They're so far ahead of the curve right now that it would almost be unwise for them to release two iPads within 1 year that weren't significantly distinguishable from each other.
So what you're saying is that the iPad 3 will be essentially a high-res version of the 2.
Right.
And what about the MacBook Pro and Air line? I just bought a new Air. I chose to buy one over a MacBook Pro. Does the Pro line have a future?
Absolutely. But the Pro line is going to start looking more like the Air line, essentially. And I believe that the two lines will at some point be, I wouldn't call them merged, but let's remember that the MacBook Air, when they introduced the 11-inch model and they sort of streamlined it even further from the original MacBook Air, Apple's claim was that this is the future of computing. Apple sometimes sends these messages that they're not even encoded. They're just right there for everyone to see. So make no mistake that they're going to be pulling optical drives out of Macs in the future. You may get them on the Mac Pro line, the very top-end Mac Tower system, but even that could be redesigned in the next year or two. Its form factor has been around for many, many, many years now, longer than any other Apple form. So I think you're going to see the optical drives come out. I think that you're going to see a lot of the same technology in the Air go into the MacBook Pro lines. And so the two will eventually just become MacBooks, and it'll all be a Pro line.
Do you see over the next year a significant change in the Apple business model when it comes to iTunes? Could we see an Apple competition to Netflix or Spotify?
I think that's entirely possible, but Apple, in sort of the way that they have operated for the past 10 years, is going to look at the market and not enter the market until they feel that they have a significant advantage over what the other ones are doing. They are not typically a copycat company, but they will take the nucleus of an idea and expand upon that idea. They didn't invent MP3 players, they didn't invent tablet computers, but they took these things and they made them much more usable and much more user-friendly. So I could see them getting into those businesses, but A, they want to make sure that they're profitable to the point where they will be happy with it, and B, that the user experience will be where they want it.
Apple has, I think it's $60 or $70 billion in the bank. Do you expect any significant acquisitions over the next year?
I'm hopeful, honestly. I've always hoped that they would buy some of the companies that are still out there.
Like Victor,
like
names.
Autodesk.
I want names.
Autodesk would be nice, but it seems like Apple's, which sounds weird, but if you think about what Autodesk does for design and people who create things, it's an incredibly powerful company. There are other companies as well.
But using the Autodesk example, isn't that the old Apple, the old Apple high-end sort of developer Apple? They don't even have a high-end product now for, say, movie editing.
Yeah, that's the only problem, is that they do seem to be backtracking out of that, which is why I would say I was hopeful that they would buy someone like Autodesk. And they could, of course, buy someone like Adobe, which would be interesting. But yeah, they seem to be backtracking from that. I mean, Shake hasn't been updated in forever, and that was a huge acquisition back when we covered it several years ago, but it's all but abandoned now. So they do seem to be getting out of that.
What about a blockbuster acquisition, a Hollywood studio, a label, or a series of labels? They could buy the entire film and movie industry and newspaper industry if they wanted to, right?
That's true. They could if they wanted to, but I think that those businesses are a lot more volatile than they would like, and I don't see them providing any additional value to what those companies do already. It could be a surprise, but it didn't really work out too well for Sony, and it hasn't worked out well for a number of other companies, so I don't know that they'll get into that game just yet.
One last thing, Victor. Will there be a one last thing this time next year? Is Apple going to explode another huge innovation, Apple TV, for example?
Yeah, we keep hearing the Apple TV thing, and I keep reminding people that Apple has a TV. It just doesn't have a giant piece of glass strapped to it. That's a hugely powerful device, actually, and when iOS 5 allows things like mirroring, then you're going to see people using the Apple TV even more, buying these things even more, because it will become somewhat of a game console. When you're able to run games through Apple TV on your big screen, much in the way that you can do already with some games like The Incident. You can't run it through the Apple TV, but you can plug in your iPad to your TV and use your iPhone as a controller. That's a very specific case because you have to have two fairly expensive pieces of hardware, but the Apple TV itself is $99. In terms of other areas, it's difficult to see where else Apple could take things. They've really got almost a complete portfolio right now, and except for expanding into areas that are tangential to these core products, it would be difficult to speculate on anything else they might do.
Well, they could always come out with a self-driving car, right?
We've heard car, and I actually tweeted today that I wish they would get into the space race. So
well, on that, Victor, that is a perfect conclusion. Apple invests in space, and you can travel now to the moon or Jupiter on an Apple, what would it be called? An iRocket, I guess?
They would probably just call it the space plane or something not so clever as that. I don't know. But they have Launchpad and they have Mission Control in OS X now, so it just seems like the next step is to create a Mac-based spaceship.
Well, you've just created a huge rumor, Victor, and I appreciate it very much. Thank you so much for appearing on TechCrunch TV.
Thank you.